to Friday Convocation. My name is Brett Garcia. I'm University Vice President and Chief of Staff, and I'll be conducting today. Thank you all for coming. We extend a special welcome to everyone who is visiting for this homecoming weekend, including students, alumni, former employees, and all our other friends and guests. Today we're privileged to hear from the head digital officer for the Deseret News and former Southern Virginia Vice President of Communications and Marketing, Burke Olsen. More about Burke in a few minutes. We have a few announcements. A lot is going on. Tonight, we have the homecoming concert at 7:30 in the Stoddard Center. For those of you who are returning, you remember that this is a big tradition at Southern Virginia, the homecoming concert. We've outgrown the Chandler Hall for this event, so we've moved it into the Stoddard Center. You won't want to miss that tonight at 7:30. Tomorrow, we have home matches for football and men's and women's soccer. And we have away matches for cross-country and women's volleyball. Why don't we everyone stand up, those teams, if you're here. Football will get us started tomorrow at 1 o'clock. I have spoken to Vice President of Athletics, Jason Lamb, and Coach Dupay, and they both said they expect wins tomorrow at home. However, I'm slightly more confident, and I'm going to give you my personal guarantee of a football win tomorrow. I hear soccer. I don't know as much about soccer, but what the heck, I'm already here. Wins for soccer as well. All right. My word is my bond, so don't miss those games. You'll remember at our first convocation of this semester, we had our friend Alex Boyer visit, and we said, that's right, it's a big deal. We said we were going to bring him back to campus. We were going to do everything possible to bring him back to campus to film one of his music videos. We were hoping to be able to do it in the next few weeks before all the leaves fall off the trees and it starts to get cold, because that's when you kind of need to do these videos. So I need to give an update on that effort. Alex has a ton of projects going on right now. We've been working hard to try to find a date that will work. But these things don't always happen exactly as you'd like them to. However, in this case, things are going exactly as we want them to, and Alex will be here in about 10 days to shoot his video with all of you. As you know, Alex's videos have gotten tens of millions of views online, and he's told us he intends for this to be his biggest production ever. So, think about something. We have a video, part of one of his videos to show, to kind of give you the idea. Think about this, but much, much bigger, and with all of you in it.
Baba yetu yetu liye mbinguni yetu yetu amina. Baba yetu yetu liye jina lako we litukuzwe.
Baba yetu yetu liye mbinguni yetu yetu amina. Baba yetu yetu liye jina lako we litukuzwe.
Utupe leo chakula chetu, tunachohitaji utusamehe makosa yetu, kumana setu na hawasamehe wale yotukasea yusutuyo kati.
We want all students, all faculty, all staff who want to participate to be in this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The filming will happen Thursday afternoon, October 19th, beginning around 3 p.m. Athletic Director Jason Lamb has already committed to making sure that all athletes are available to participate that afternoon. If you have class or if you have on-campus work during that time frame, please check with your professor, check with your supervisor, whomever, to see what's possible and make sure you can be there if it's at all a possibility. Stay tuned for more information over the next few weeks. Also this weekend, we're starting a new tradition at Southern Virginia. Starting this weekend, every second Sunday of the month will be the second Sunday fireside. And we're going to start now and end, hopefully, never. The first one in this new tradition will be held this Sunday, October 8th, at 7 p.m. right here in the Knight Arena. This is going to be a fireside. We're inviting, I think it's 5 states to come to this. All young adults, young single adults, young married couples. This is all about people, your age. So make sure you come. After the fireside, we'll just go right up those stairs and there will be refreshments and a chance to mix and mingle and socialize for a while after the fireside. So another event to not miss. We're also saddened to hear of the passing of Elder Hales the last weekend, and his funeral is today. We're going to broadcast that funeral at the Institute beginning at 1 o'clock. Is that right, 1 o'clock? Okay, 1 o'clock our time. So if you'd like to go to that, go to the Institute. You can also see it on a lot of the BYU TV app on your iPad or a lot of other options online. We'll now sing the first verse of All Creatures of Our God and King. We'd like to thank Dr. Kyle Nielsen as our chorister and Dr. Keenan Reeser as our organist. Following this opening song, Andrew Olsen, Southern Virginia Club Senator, will offer the invocation. It is my pleasure now to introduce our speaker today, Burke Olsen, whom I have personally known as a colleague and a friend for many years. Burke Olsen is the head digital officer at the Deseret News, Utah's oldest newspaper and the longest running business in the Beehive State. Before moving back to his native Utah, he worked here at Southern Virginia, first as the Director of Public Relations and later as Vice President of Communications and Marketing. Prior to the creation of the Buena Vista YSA Stake, he served as Bishop of the University 3rd Ward. His career spans the for-profit and not-for-profit sectors, including the Pew Research Center, the Salt Lake 2002 Olympic Winter Games, the dedication of the National World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C., and 2 public relations firms. He received a BA in Communications from Brigham Young University and did graduate work at the Johns Hopkins University. Burke and his wife Nicole live in North Salt Lake, Utah with their 4 children, 2 of whom were born in Virginia. Now that's the biography that Burke sent us, very modest. I know him personally. I want to add a few things. Most specifically, Burke is a world-class media professional. While at Southern Virginia, Burke was responsible for creating what I think was our first really professional branding, including our website, our social media presence, and everything that goes along with that. His work was critical in laying the foundation and helping us to grow the school, and we are still experiencing the benefits of his work today. After leaving Southern Virginia, Burke was the general manager for DeseretNews.com, where he was central in modernizing his organization's approach to news and fully embracing and leading in the industry the development of strategies and techniques to deliver media digitally. His successes have caused other major news organizations to take notice. I know personally that he is in high demand as a speaker and consultant for other major media organizations all over the world. To me, Burke is an example of the caliber of people who spend time with us here at Southern Virginia and then go on to change the world in a positive way. Maybe most importantly, I know Burke to be a good man, a good father, and a faithful servant of the Lord, and I am proud to call him my colleague and friend. Following Burke's address, our closing hymn will be As I Love You. Aaron Vinson, Southern Virginia Junior Class President, will offer the benediction. Burke Olsen.
I wasn't going to say this, but it took 21 years for the university to run out of speakers for homecoming. Here I am. Thanks, Brett, for that kind introduction. There really are phenomenal people who labor at this university. And it was one of the great privileges of my life to work with them for 5.5 years. I'm grateful for the opportunity, President Wilcox, to be here, and appreciate your graciousness. There's a great spirit here on campus. Many of you have experienced that when you came here for the first time. I felt it again last night watching the orchestra rehearse for the concert tonight in Bella Voce. Think back about times that I felt the Spirit of the Lord in my life because of the power of music and performances and even athletic accomplishment that takes place on this campus so often. I've also had prayers answered on this campus, a miracle that took place on the grass just outside this building. It built the faith of a 3-year-old daughter and her father. I love this place, and it's wonderful to be back for homecoming. More than a few things have changed since I last was here, and the rate of change seems to be accelerating. So first of all, I have to find Chris Pendleton because I've got a whole wardrobe of green stuff that has to be replaced. Secondly, this Launchpad initiative is great, and I'm wondering if there's an extra iPad Pro laying around somewhere. For the first time, I'm actually regretting giving away the master keys that I had when I left the university. Now, the best thing I did for the university was to bring my parents here as volunteers. It's not often that a son can say that his parents are his gift to the next generation, but it's true for me. And the hardest part of bringing them here is that they're more popular and more liked than I ever was. And this is evidenced by the fact that when students who were in my ward when I was bishop, come to North Salt Lake, they drive right past my house and go to visit my own parents. So think about losing a popularity contest with your mom. I am thinking about Elder Razman's visit. I wasn't here for that, but my parents were at the time, again, volunteering at the university. I was at a conference in Denver, and I called them that night and asked them to walk me through every moment of that historic visit. That was a long time coming. And a great sense of the value and the accomplishment of the faculty and staff who give so much to this institution. Now, you'll all come back someday, those of you who are students. You'll see the alumni who are here this weekend. But you'll come back today and you will come to thank the faculty and staff for what they did for you. You understand some of it now, but that appreciation will deepen over time and become even more powerful for you. Now, I pray that the remainder of my remarks will have some merit and be worthy of your time. First, I will share some historical context of the news industry in the United States and the founding of the early history of the Deseret News. Next, I will share some of the consequences we face in the modern world today based on the ubiquity of technology. And finally, I will propose 3 keys to maintaining balance and perspective in our lives. I'm very grateful for the freedoms granted us by the U.S. Constitution, but none are more precious to me than those expressed in the First Amendment. It reads, Congress shall make no law representing an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And of those, religious liberty and the freedoms of speech and press and assembly are most significant. It's precisely those freedoms that provided the conditions that allow for what Latter-day Saints recognize to be the Restoration. With regard to freedom of the press, newspapers have played a vital role in the American experiment. From the early colonial papers to the pre- and post-Constitution political papers, to those forged on the frontier, newspapers and pamphlets were a primary source for promulgating ideas and recording the first drafts of history. It was the Independent Journal, a semi-weekly newspaper in New York City, that first published the Federalist Papers, written by James Madison, John Jay, and the man who once again is the man du jour, Alexander Hamilton. Of the free press, Thomas Jefferson, incidentally Alexander Hamilton's mortal enemy, he said, "Were it left to me to decide if we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." The history of newspapers, of course, is not without scandal and controversy. There are many examples of unscrupulous practices, salacious scandals, and outright fabrications. And that's saying nothing of today's plague of fake news, both that which truly is fake and that which is so called by people who oppose what the news concludes. For Latter-day Saints, it's worth noting that everywhere Joseph Smith and his followers went, they sought to establish three vital entities: a school, a temple, and a printing press, all for the sake of learning. In March 1847, anticipating the need for Mormon pioneers to have a printing press in their new home in the West, Brigham Young sent William W. Phelps from Winter Quarters, Nebraska, to procure a printing press in the East. Phelps returned 7 months later with a wrought iron hand press, which was left at Winter Quarters for 2 years. When you're thinking about building homes and slugging it out in the West, you got to take food and supplies first. So 2 years later, they send an ox-driven wagon back to Winter Quarters and bring the printing press into the Salt Lake Valley. Brigham Young was nothing if not ambitious. Within 2 years of beginning to settle their new home in the Salt Lake Valley, he spearheaded the creation of the provisional state of Deseret. He also decided to submit a formal application for statehood. In the materials he submitted to the U.S. government, he proposed a massive territory that included most of present-day Utah and Nevada, significant portions of Arizona and California, as well as sections of Colorado, Idaho, New Mexico, Oregon, and Wyoming. In what might properly be called a guerrilla marketing campaign, President Young started naming enterprises Deseret, hoping that the label would stick and the state would be so named. He encouraged his fellow Mormons to include the word Deseret in the names of the companies they were founding. And in 1850, Brother Young directed the creation of the University of Deseret, which later was renamed the University of Utah. As a side note, Southern Virginia University was founded 17 years later, and BYU a solid 8 years after that. As you know, the word Deseret Deseret, a word taken from the Book of Mormon, means honeybee, and was used by Utah's early settlers as a symbol of industry and hard work. It is the reason Utah eventually became known as the Beehive State. Mark Twain wrote this: "The Mormon crest was easy and it was simple, unostentatious, and it fitted like a glove. It was a representation of a golden beehive with all the bees at work." The first edition of the Deseret News was published on June 15, 1850, and was 8 pages long. Its motto was Truth and Liberty, and it contained a prospectus written by its editor, Willard Richards, who also served as a member of the LDS Church's first presidency. It said, "We propose to publish a small weekly sheet as large as our local circumstances will permit, to be called Deseret News, designed originally to record the passing events of our state and in connection refer to the arts and sciences, embracing general education, medicine, law, divinity, domestic and political economy, and everything that may fall under our observations, which may tend to promote the best interest, welfare, pleasure, and amusement of our fellow citizens." That's just one sentence. Would your professors let you get away with that? It continues, "A paper that is worth printing is worth preserving. If worth preserving, it is worth binding. For this purpose, we issue in pamphlet form, and if every subscriber shall preserve each copy of the news and bind it at the close of the volume, their children's children may read the doings of their fathers, which otherwise might have been forgotten ages to come." That first issue contained reports of the U.S. Congress about slavery, a 5-month-old address by President Zachary Taylor, and news of the San Francisco fire, which had taken place 6 months earlier. A subscription to the paper cost $2.50 for 6 months, or 15 cents per issue. And copies were passed around and read by dozens and dozens of people. 15 years after its founding, the paper began to publish twice a week. 2 years later, it added a daily edition called the Deseret Evening News. The first action photos weren't published until 1900, when it featured several images of the aftermath of a mine explosion in Schofield, Utah, which killed more than 200 men and was the worst mine disaster in U.S. history up to that time. The Deseret News had several competitors in its early years, but none stuck until the Mormon Tribune was founded in 1870 by former Mormons who were not happy with the church. And the Mormon Tribune later was renamed the Salt Lake Tribune. Competition and animosity between the Tribune and the Deseret News started early. Deseret News writer John Q. Cannon, enraged over what he thought was a vile story, punched and whipped a Tribune reporter when he saw him in the street. We don't do that anymore. Due to paper shortages, there were many times in the 1850s and 60s that the newspaper could not be published. It was during that time that Buena Vista resident Drew Alston's great-great-grandfather, George Goddard, received what may have been the most disappointing mission call since Jonah was called to Nineveh. Instead of receiving a call to his homeland of England or to Scandinavia or even the exotic southern states, he was called to stay in Salt Lake City and go door to door collecting rags. The rags he collected were processed and added to wood pulp, what could be gathered to print the Deseret News. Now, I've heard Brother Alston testify of the strong faith exhibited by his ancestor and the blessings that came into Goddard's life from meeting so many people in Utah and southern Idaho. His mission earned him both respect and customers for his business interests. As with other newspapers, time-worn and modern, the Deseret News has covered historic events, popular culture, and many things in between. For instance, April 23, 1869, tightrope performance. We understand that Professor DeHoon will give another of his excellent performances on the tightrope tomorrow afternoon near Faust and Hout Stables, during which he will cook a dinner in a common cook stove on the rope. January 5th, 1870, a Western man has invented an ink pencil, which is said to be the best thing yet. It consists of a tube about the size of an ordinary pencil containing ink. Near the point of the pencil is a little iron stopper resting on a spiral spring inside. When the point of the pencil is placed on the paper, the stopper is forced up and the ink flows evenly without blotting the paper. It needs no adjustment and can be carried in the pocket. August 20th, 1877, death of President Brigham Young. At 1 minute past 4 o'clock this afternoon, President Brigham Young departed this life surrounded by his family and intimate friends. This announcement will thrill the whole territory with grief. We feel the weight of this great loss to the world and cannot, at this moment, express in the faintest degree our deep sense of the void occasioned by his departure. He was a great man in every sense of the term, and he has left his mark upon the age which the future will never efface, but which will grow brighter and broader as the man, his deeds, and his sentiments become better known and appreciated. Fall 1896, 3 women elected to the Utah legislature, 1 to the state senate. Martha Hughes Cannon was the first of her gender to hold such an office in the U.S. A physician and longtime supporter of the women's suffrage movement, Martha challenged her husband, Angus, in a race to win the seat. The Deseret News noted that the majority of those who cast ballots in the 1896 election were women. In fact, the majority of registered voters in Utah at that time were women. The Deseret News has had various business interests over the years, and it's worth noting that both Deseret Book and KSL Radio began as Deseret News efforts. In fact, the first broadcast that can be traced to the Deseret News was pirate radio, completely illegal, but awesome. Thomas S. Monson, the current president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, joined the Deseret News staff in 1948 as a classified ad salesman. He quickly rose within the company and eventually was named general manager of the Deseret News Press, which at that time was the largest press west of the Mississippi River. In 1952, the Deseret News was left in poor financial position following a very aggressive campaign to win more subscribers. The result was the formation of a partnership between the News and the Tribune. And as an exception to antitrust legislation, newspapers are allowed to form joint operating agreements. The News and Tribune worked out a 30-year arrangement that consolidated their printing and advertising operations, but not their editorial staffs. The agreement was renewed again in 1982 and several times since then. A few years ago, the Deseret News purchased outright the printing presses and paid a sum of money to the Tribune's owner to become, for the first time, the senior partner, which also gave the Deseret News the largest share of the profits that the two entities shared. The Tribune's owner at the time was a New York City hedge fund that was liquidating its assets around the country and had no interest in Utah, journalism, or propping up a newspaper. Little has been said publicly about the details of the latest agreement, but I will say that it is my firm belief that the Deseret News saved our partner from ruin. We'll never get credit for this, and helped pave the way for the Tribune's purchase by a local Utah family. Without a benevolent Deseret News, there would be no Salt Lake Tribune today. It's now a rare thing to have two prominent newspapers in one American city, and we hope it stays that way for a long, long time to come. One more headline that I just love. August 4, 1962. Utah's spouse has role in current movie. Robert Redford, husband of a Provo girl, has one of the leading roles in War Hunt, currently at the Lyric in Highland, a second feature to The Miracle Worker. Mr. Redford is the husband of the former Lola Van Wagenen of Provo. The Redfords visited with Mr. and Mrs. Van Wagenen for several days last week, and during that time they attended a special showing of the movie. Afterwards, they left for Hollywood, where Mr. Redford is slated for a starring role in a Dr. Kildare episode being produced in color. Movie buffs will be interested to know that Robert Redford and his former brother-in-law, Sterling Van Wagenen, are the founders of the Sundance Film Festival. Over the years, the Deseret News and its staff have won hundreds of awards, including a Pulitzer in 1962. And just this year, I traveled to Chicago with a colleague where we received an award for having the best local news website in the country. Interestingly, DeseretNews.com and our app are used by more people, many more, outside of Utah than within. And well over 4 million people visit our website and apps each month. I even hear from Southern Virginia faculty members from time to time about our coverage. Sometimes they find typos or suggest things we can do better. Once a professor, always a professor. Our parent company, the Deseret Management Corporation, has a unique and inspiring mission to be trusted voices of light and truth reaching hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Think about that. From the beginnings as a pioneer newspaper in the territory of Deseret. The Deseret News is the flagship entity among several that seek to fulfill this mission. In particular, we are trying to give people information that will help them feel more confident in living their beliefs so they can make a difference in their families and in their communities. In recent years, we've adopted a framework called solutions journalism. Pioneered by David Bornstein at the New York Times, solutions journalism looks not only at the problems that affect society, but also reports on the novel solutions people and organizations are employing to solve those problems. During the last year, our journalists have published important work about teen suicide, the opioid epidemic's causes and effects in Utah, and a widely cited profile of Jason Chaffetz, who now is a former Utah congressman. And our journalists are doing great work day after day. A recent application for a position on our investigative team, the person was a part of a group that won a Pulitzer Prize last year. In the cover letter he submitted with his application, he said he was astounded by the quality of work Deseret News journalists do and believes that we are aiming higher with our coverage than is his current employer. In essence, at the Deseret News, we work to help people find truth, liberty, light, knowledge, and solutions. Our reach is larger than ever before, our vision is clear, and we are building the tools, websites, apps, platforms, and the content to reach hundreds of millions of people worldwide. So what? A once cherished habit of both the working and upper classes was the reading of a daily newspaper. Whether in the morning or evening, Americans made time in their lives to learn what was happening in the world around them. I might be romanticizing this just a bit, but the numbers back me up. Newspaper subscriptions are a shadow of what they once were. Subscriptions have declined dramatically, as have print revenues. It's said that newspapers used to print money, and that was true for the Deseret News for many years, but things have changed, and there are several key reasons for that. One is that newspaper subscribers are dying. That's the number one reason that we lose subscriptions. Furthermore, the rise of the web has disrupted the print model from both a consumer and an advertiser perspective. But in the recent past, without social media to tell people what was trending and important, many Americans read broadly based on the news judgment of editors, the original aggregators, who chose not only what was relevant, but also what was important. So my thesis to you is that you and I must be fiercely intentional and purposefully consume news, as our grandparents did, so so that we can be better citizens, leaders, parents, and humans. Let's take a step back and think about the nature of time and our relationship to it. The word time and the concept of marking its passage is utilized hundreds of times in the scriptures. It's used to mark milestones, seasons, eras, and dispensations. Time counted in hours, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds is an entirely modern construct, enabled by modern technology. But as we've gotten better at measuring time, we've also become expert at squandering it. Psalm 90 records that the years of our lives number 70, 70 years to learn, love, serve, and create. Even in the age of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, our time can be spent only once. Or as Thoreau said, you cannot kill time without injuring eternity. In a discourse that centers on accessing the power of the atonement of Christ, the great Book of Mormon missionary Amulet teaches that this life is the time for men and women to prepare to meet God. He continues, if we do not improve our time while in this life, then cometh the night of darkness wherein there can be no labor performed. Time will pass whether we're wasting it or making the most of it. Elder Dallin H. Oates teaches, because of increased life expectancies and modern time-saving devices, most of us have far more discretionary time than our predecessors. We are accountable for how we use that time. So, should you all spend your extra time reading newspapers? Yes, but that's not all. Generally speaking, as the habit of newspaper reading has dissipated, we have filled our lives with things of lesser value. The Southern Virginia core curriculum lays a foundation for understanding philosophy, history, science, mathematics, the arts, and contemporary issues. If you understand the people, issues, and institutions in your community and world, you are much more likely to engage them successfully. I have great respect for Southern Virginia staff and faculty who have run for office and served on community boards and councils. We would do well to be informed and then to follow their example. Our lives are increasingly entwined with technology as wearables and the Internet of Things continue to creep onto our skin and our stuff. This will happen to an even greater extent. There are so many things to distract us that if we are not intentional and deliberate, it is almost guaranteed that we will not have as broad an understanding of the world as a Southern Virginia education merits. Algorithms may deliver what's interesting to our social feeds, but relying on them is no substitute for the variety of content and the joy of discovery that comes from deliberate news consumption. With the precious gift of time and the injunction that we use it wisely, there are an alarming number of alternatives. We who carry smartphones in our pockets and have smartwatches on our wrists don't need to be told this, but we must be aware of and seek to counter the risks associated with our battery-powered lives. As Elder Gary E. Stevenson taught in General Conference just Sunday, potential consequences are dire. He said, the use of social media, mobile apps, and games can be inordinately time-consuming and can reduce face-to-face interaction. This loss of personal conversation can affect marriages, take the place of valuable spiritual practices, and stifle the development of social skills, especially among youth. There was a significant culture change that took place when I served a mission. Mobile phones became common. Soon after I returned, I remembered walking out of a class and seeing a fellow student pull out his phone and talk while we were walking across campus. And I was incredulous. I thought, who does he think he is? He has to talk to somebody on the phone in between classes. Now, no, this was before text messaging was available in the US. Second note, I bought my first cell phone like 3 weeks later. And phones keep getting better and even more distracting. It's hard to believe that it was just 10 years ago that Apple CEO Steve Jobs announced a new device that has changed all of our lives. It really has. At a highly anticipated product announcement, Jobs explained that Apple was ready to release 3 new and revolutionary devices: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. Then he added, these are not 3 separate devices. This is one device, and we're calling it iPhone. Whether you've been a long-time Apple user or Android user, or your iPad Pro is your first Apple device, you have been impacted by this revolutionary invention. There were phones with texting and web browsing before the iPhone, but the iPhone ushered in the age of the touch screen and the app economy. Just think, you couldn't swipe right on Tinder or up on Mutual without the invention of a smartphone. We carry immense technology and access to the libraries of the world in our pockets, including every news source imaginable. But we spend so much of our screen time doing things that are of little value, and it's making us unhappy. The headline of a recent article in The Atlantic posed this question: has the smartphone destroyed a generation? Allow me to read a few observations from this important piece of journalism. The arrival of the smartphone has radically changed every aspect of teenagers' lives, from the nature of their social interactions to their mental health. These changes have affected young people in every corner of the nation and in every type of household. There is compelling evidence that the devices we placed in young people's hands are having a profound effects upon their lives and making them seriously unhappy. The more time teens spend looking at screens, the more likely they are to report symptoms of depression. Teens who spend more time than average on screen activities are more likely to be unhappy than those who spend more time than average on non-screen activities. And those who spend more time than average on non-screen activities are more likely to be happy. So here you are, adults, and society has armed you with devices that can make you unhappy. Social media is a particular culprit. One reason listed in the article is that it exacerbates the feelings of isolation for someone who was not invited to a party, but sees its every moment documented in snaps and Instagram stories. I was on my mission telling somebody that I'd never been to a party with sex, drugs, or alcohol. And then it dawned on me for the first time that I'd never been invited to a party. I can only imagine how painful it would have been then to be sitting at home and looking at Snapchat and seeing everybody having a good, albeit bad time. I'm glad I didn't have to live through that. So what's the remedy? A balanced life that includes more than just screen time. Again, from The Atlantic. If you were going to give advice for a happy adolescence, it would be straightforward. Put down the phone, turn off the laptop, and do something, anything, that does not involve a screen. In his masterful talk, Focus and Priorities, Elder Oaks teaches that being focused helps us avoid what is harmful. Though there are many ways to occupy our time, there are many fewer ways to spend it wisely. In the spirit of honesty, this part of my remarks is as applicable to me as it is to you. I have night owl tendencies that are hard for me to overcome. It's easy for me to stay up late to power through a work project or to binge watch a show. My late night habit, which began in high school, has rarely been interrupted except for my time as a missionary. As a result, I've often slept later than I meant to, resulting in rushed mornings that shortchanged both my scripture study and personal prayer. Trying to survive on too little sleep has often left me sluggish and foggy-minded during the daytime, when I need to be alert and focused at work and home. Recently, I listened to a book during my commute that has begun to have a powerful impact on me. Essentialism was written by the English-born, Stanford-based lecturer, consultant, and LDS bishop, Greg McKeown. It is both a New York Times bestseller and, for me, a life changer. In addition to teaching that we should seek what matters most and eschew the non-essential in every aspect of our lives, as Latter-day Saints, we've been long taught that. One chapter makes a powerful case for getting enough sleep, and for some reason, it convinced me. Another chapter clearly shows the benefits of having standard nighttime and morning routines that include what is most important to us and then abiding by them. Therefore, let me suggest 3 habits or routines that will richly bless our lives and help us achieve much needed balance. 1, having a daily devotional. 2, choose news. 3, put down the pixels. 1, have a daily devotional. The first or last thing you do each day should be to have a devotional. It might include prayer, mindful meditation, scripture study, and journal writing. All of these activities are worthy of our time, but it is not possible to overstate the importance of daily study of the Word of God as revealed to ancient and modern prophets. Spiritual nourishment is the heart of a Christian life, and it should come first. When you choose to do it for yourself, you will see that it can have a massive impact on your studies, work, relationships, and spirituality. Elder M. Russell Ballard teaches, "The stunning reality, my dear brothers and sisters, is that you control how close you are to the Lord. You determine just how clear and readily available promptings from the Holy Ghost will be. You determine this by your actions, your attitude, by the choices you make, by the things you watch and wear and listen to and read, and by how consistently and sincerely you invite the Spirit into your life." 2. Choose news. In addition to seeking daily devotion, Latter-day Saints have been told to seek learning out of the best books, and I would add, for present purposes, the best news sources. How can you be engaged in society, as prophets have counseled us, if you are not aware of local, national, and international issues? The deliberate habit of daily, concentrated news reading will set you apart in the world today. Choose a few reputable publications, I can think of one, websites, apps, and read them daily. Read inside and outside your native areas of interest. On controversial issues, read sources that reinforce your views and those that don't. Read news, commentary, and opinion. Read short snippets of breaking news. Read features, reviews, and profiles of interesting people. Read long-form investigative pieces that hold institutions accountable. If you're at a loss for where to start, try downloading the Deseret News app. If you enable notifications, you'll be among the first to know breaking news from Utah, including news related to the LDS Church, which may be of interest to some of you. Number 3, put down the pixels. In General Conference last week, Sister Bonnie L. Oscarson taught, we live in a culture where more and more we are focused on the small, little screen in our hands than we are the people around us. We have substituted texting and tweeting for actually looking someone in the eye and smiling, or even rarer, having a face-to-face conversation. Close quote. Steve Jobs famously restricted his own children's use of the very devices his company pioneered. Given the research I've cited today, and based on the input of my wife and children in my own life when I am too often on my phone, I urge you to make time in your life during which you detach from technology and do something else. Have the courage to make rules for yourselves and for your families. You might consider meal times, vacations, church meetings, and other periods as being technology-free. Some families ban digital devices from the family room, bedrooms, or even the restroom. Whatever you decide, you will be blessed for it, and you are likely to be happier. It's curious to me that self-denial and limitations free us and bring us more joy. Taking a break from technology can be good for our relationships and for our spirits. From Elder Oaks we read, each of us should be careful that the current flood of information does not occupy our time so completely that we cannot focus on and hear and heed the still, small voice that is available to guide each of us with our own challenges today. To conclude, I believe strongly in the importance of having a daily devotional, choosing news, and putting down the pixels. If we do these things, we will have the Spirit with us in greater abundance. We will be better informed and more prepared to make a difference in the world. We'll be better leader servants. This is my humble prayer for each of us now and into the future. And I share it with you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
One